Hello, and welcome to the Scope of Things podcast, a no-nonsense look at the promise and problems of clinical research based on a sweep of the latest news and emerging trends in the field, and what I think is worthy of your 30 or so minutes of time. I'm Deborah Borfitz, senior science writer for Clinical Research News, which means I spend a lot of time with my ear to the ground on your behalf, and a lot of hours every week speaking to top experts from around the world. Please consider making this your trusted go-to channel for staying current on things that matter, whether they give us hope or cause for pause. In another 5 minutes or so, I'll be speaking with Doug Bain, founder and consulting partner of UK-based ClinFlo, about his proposed regulatory blueprint for digital trials. But first, the latest news, including a tool for detecting fraud and sampling bias in decentralized trials, automating the transfer of clinical data into trial platforms, technology for identifying potentially dangerous drugs before the start of trials, a novel women's health and menopause initiative, the possibility of a regenerative therapy for spinal cord injury, and a new oral treatment for preventing dementia. Researchers at the Medical University of South Carolina have produced a set of tools designed to detect fraud and monitor sampling bias in decentralized clinical trials while making the data collection process easier for study participants. The Cheat Blocker tool helps to detect fraud during the early stages of a trial by checking for duplicate screening submissions, while the Quota Config tool watches for key characteristics during screening to ensure a representative sample is enrolled. A third My Trials tool provides a streamlined process whereby participants can use a single smartphone app to record and securely submit multiple biomarkers from home. The ultimate plan is to make the entire platform available to scientists around the world. The Mount Sinai Tisch Cancer Center has become one of the first big-name research institutions in the U.S. to automate the transfer of clinical data from its electronic health record system into clinical trial platforms. The new capability is powered by Ignite Data's Archer platform and integrated with Epic, and early pilot testing showed reductions of up to 70% in manual transcription time, improving both data quality and workforce efficiency. The real-time data integration tool, initially being used in oncology, also allows oversight bodies to review aggregated safety and trial data sooner, helping to identify trends, hasten response to potential concerns, and accelerate decision-making during the development of new therapies. To contend with one of the major reasons for failures in new drug development, researchers in Korea have built a machine learning-based technology that learns the differences between animals and humans to preemptively identify potentially dangerous drugs before the start of clinical trials. They looked at the genotype-phenotype difference between cells, mice, and humans in terms of how genes targeted by drugs function, focusing on the gene's perturbation impact on survival, the pattern of gene expression in different tissues, and the connectivity of genes within biological networks. The AI tool demonstrated predictive power significantly better than reliance on drug chemical data alone and existing state-of-the-art models, as well as the ability to alert users to drugs facing market withdrawal due to toxicity. Tufts University is launching a women's health and menopause initiative, a first-of-its-kind academic collaboration uniting expertise in its schools of medicine and nutrition with the renowned Tufts Medicine Health System. A $4 million gift is funding the initiative, endowing 2 inaugural professorships whose holders will serve as co-directors and drive an agenda intended to advance clinical care, education, and research in novel ways that improves women's health across the lifespan. Across disciplines, Tufts scientists will focus on longevity and healthy living. Research work will explore vascular aging, neurobehavioral health, diet, and chronic disease, and build a national menopause outcomes registry, linking patient data, clinical care, and research. We may soon be seeing a clinical trial of a regenerative therapy for spinal cord injury, thanks to researchers at University of California, San Diego School of Medicine, who harnessed bioinformatics to fast-track the discovery of a promising new drug known as Thiorfan, previously tested in humans for non-neurological conditions. In adult human brain cells previously not possible to culture, it increased neurite outgrowth, a key metric of regeneration. And when combined with neural stem cell grafts in rats with spinal cord injury, it led to significant improvements in hand function and an increase in neuronal regeneration into the injury site. And finally, Researchers in Denmark are investigating an oral treatment for the prevention of frontotemporal dementia, aka Bruce Willis dementia, in people at genetic risk of the degenerative brain disease. It is the most common cause of dementia in people under the age of 60, progresses rapidly, and at present has no approved treatments. The first clinical trial shows that the treatment, which is being developed by Vesper Bio, can normalize levels of the protein progranulin in cerebral spinal fluid and has a favorable safety profile in patients who have not yet developed symptoms of the disease. The next step will be a larger clinical trial involving symptomatic patients. As a reminder, links to the articles, studies, and press releases referenced in this month's news segment can be found in the show notes. It is now my absolute delight to bring in clinical trial data innovation veteran Doug Bain to talk about some of his recommended changes to the now outdated 21 CFR Part 11 regulation of the U.S. Food and Drug Administration related to the use of electronic records and electronic signatures. Thanks for joining me from across the pond, Doug.
Thank you, Deb. Very nice to be here. I'm happy to discuss something that I've probably been thinking about for 25 years or so.
And we're going to try to cover it in about 20 minutes, maybe. We'll do our best. Okay. Well, since we're talking about regulations here and the ones in effect in the U.S., I wanted to start out by covering what qualifies you to hold an opinion on such things and perhaps gives you a bit of professional sway. 20 years in, of course, is part of that. Could you please take us all on a quick journey of your career up until the recent launch of your consultancy?
Absolutely. So, as you say, I think I'm referred to as a veteran. I'm not sure if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but it does mean that I've been working in this particular field pretty well full on since 1996. Primarily, I've focused on software, so I'm a tech guy. So, used to work at IBM. Worked on the ClinFlo platform, worked at Medidata, so I was one of the early employees at Medidata, joining in 2004. But I've also developed my own platforms, so I developed a platform called ClinPal. I also had 5 years at a CRO, which was also very useful, understanding that side of things. But earlier this year, I decided to branch out my own and form my own consulting company. And that's given me pause to consider where I feel things do need to change, not just obviously in the software side, but in how regulations help support and control good and bad technology.
Yeah, I'm sure it helped you appreciate a lot of the on-the-ground realities of end users as well. Is that all sort of part of your mission here? It seems to me that was what I was getting from you last we talked.
Yeah, I do feel strongly that we do hold quite a lot of responsibility. I say we, those involved in the technology development and technology use, we hold responsibility for the safe and effective study of drugs. And sometimes I do feel that things are getting in the way. Technology should be helping, not hindering. So I'm always looking at ways that can improve the experience of technology for sites and patients. And I think the way in which regulations have aged, if you call it, has led to increasing levels of inefficiency even in how we run clinical trials. And I just thought this time I put forward some ideas on how we could improve them.
Yeah, okay. Well, this is a good way to segue into a discussion about your strategy for turning 21 CFR Part 11, published during the early age of the internet, into a more practical regulation that helps streamline rather than bog down clinical trials. Before we dig into the particulars of your plan, which we're going to do, could you give us a sort of the 10,000-foot view of your blueprint and what sort of anchors it?
So, I think there's a few areas where the actual application of the regulations, they don't hold value. I think ultimately, if you were to speak to a chronic disease cancer patient and say, do you care about something like source data? They wouldn't. They wouldn't see the value in it. And I think there's been quite a push on the last few years about risk-based And I think some of the criteria that are defined in 21 CFR Part 11 don't really consider risk. The definition of source or the use of cloud platforms. There's old rules applied to new methods, and they're not as efficient as they could be. So I've just thought through, based on my experience of developing my own platform, what would I like to see change that I believe would bring therapies more rapidly to market while not compromising quality and safety.
Are you enjoying the conversation? We'd love to hear from you. Please subscribe to the podcast and give us a rating. It helps other people find and join the conversation. If you've got speaker or topic ideas, we'd love to hear those too. You can send them in a podcast review.
Well, I definitely want to hear. I know there's various pieces to this plan, if you will, and one of them is this idea of the trusted third party. Can you, tell me what would qualify someone, to take on that role, and how would trust in that entity be built? And as envisioned, would every trial or set of trials have its own? I guess your TTP is what we call them, trusted third party. Walk us through. What would that entail? Being a trusted third party, and what value does it bring to the table, and where do the efficiency gains come from?
So maybe it's probably best described more from the end user perspective. Okay. So when you do clinical trials, most typically a sponsor will fund the technologies that are involved in that clinical trial. And as a sponsor funding the technology, generally they almost own the entity, the data that surrounds that. So they'll, let's say it's an electronic data capture system. They'll license a system, EDC system. It could be from Viva or Medidata or one of the other vendors. And they then are the sort of, let's call it the key holders of the system. Now, what that means is that you end up with certain levels of inefficiency, in that when you do a trial, instances of software are set up for the sponsor, and sites will be asked to log in to these instances of software. Now, that's led to a few issues. Well, first of all, as I'm sure sites will be familiar with, many logins, because we're setting up an instance of software that's specific and controlled by the sponsor. And also, they can't necessarily take their use of this EDC system and take it forward to other studies and other sponsors they might run with. So the sponsors each hold their own control over these instances, and it leads to terrible inefficiencies. So you can't typically carry forward maybe training, you can't use single sign-on to the same degree, and so on and so forth. What I would like to see changed is this idea of a trusted third party where all the different stakeholders can sign up and can have an instance of this platform beyond the scope of a single study or beyond the scope of a single sponsor. So, the way that might appear to a site is they sign up to, ABC EDC platform, and they will continue to have an account on that environment for as long as they want. And they will be able to apply that account to any trial or to any sponsor and be able to effectively reuse a login or reuse training without the direct control of the sponsor. Now, this goes further if you think about it from the patient's perspective. If the sponsor controls this clinical trial environment, the patient's existence in that platform is limited to the existence for a single clinical trial. With the trusted third-party platform, what you have is an environment where patients and sites and so on can sign up to it. And at the end of the study, they can still, potentially use that platform and potentially even have access to the data in that platform, maybe their data in the clinical trial. And they can sign up on the same platform for other sponsors and other trials. So the idea of trusted third party allows this instance to continue to exist beyond the scope of any individual organization or person, because it's the trusted third party who controls that environment and manages the security and validates the security to ensure it always works. So that's the idea of it. That's the idea.
Very good. It sounds brilliant and complicated. And we have a ways to go for sure. And I also wanted to talk about another sort of piece of your puzzle, if you will, this proposed hyper trials designation. What sort of speed gains would a sponsor realize by seeking that status as you've recommended? And what might the FDA eligibility criteria look like?
Right. So this is, the name hypertrial is not something that's out there. It's a name I've given to a set of particular approaches to running a clinical trial. And the overall idea is that it's more digital, it's less paper, and any of the processes that maybe still remain in order to support, investigator-led studies don't necessarily need to be slowing down studies that may be able to run faster because they have the resources or size or capacity to go faster. So I think I'm sure people will be familiar with clinical trials that were run to support COVID vaccines. They ran very, very quickly, and it was almost despite the regulations. They did follow the rules and regulations, but it was quite difficult. There was a lot of dialogue, a lot of discussion, a lot of agreement between the drug manufacturers and the regulators to allow the studies to run in that particular way. We would like to make this a matter of course, and provided you meet certain criteria, you can run on a high-speed basis. You have to agree to have integrated systems, you have to agree to run in a fully digital fashion, and so on and so forth. And by doing so, you can speed up the overall process, both for the sponsors, but also for regulators gaining access to information.
Okay, that all makes total sense. You've been campaigning for a while now for the FDA to retire the term source in favor of authoritative data that is everyone's point of reference for a study. Why has this been such a hard fight to win? And have we inched any closer to that new day?
I wish I could say yes. The term source is just hung around. I mean, it's almost something that's unique to clinical research, and that for those maybe not familiar with it, we have a special designation of source data where it's considered the point of reference when carrying out clinical trials. So the place in which data is originally captured is called the source data. So if that data happens to be in a post-it note or a pad of paper or wherever, that is the source data. And in principle, according to the regulations, it's that source data that should be confirmed as being a match for the data that's entered into or transposed into an ECRF. So my challenge there is that that data may not be good, or may not even be as good as the data that's gone through an EDC system with edit checks and and dynamics and so on. So I would like to see a better support for what I've referred to as authoritative data, rather than simply always referring back to the original record of data. Because I believe the systems are capturing this data according to a protocol, according to relatively strict standards, validated standards. In many ways should be considered a better representation of the data rather than whatever was scribbled down in a post-it note.
Yeah, and the FDA, of course, has a new administration with its own set of priorities. How do your ideas square with what the new FDA commissioner and director of the Center for Biologics Evaluation and Research have publicly disclosed as their modernization plan?
Well, I think I would say we're on the same page. We're both trying to achieve the same thing. What I would like to do is certainly come at it from the industry's perspective, the technology industry perspective, saying, here's some ideas for you guys. This is where we feel we're being slowed down. And if you were to, accept these standards, or then I think we would move things forward. And so I don't want to be just ripping up the rule book altogether. I think there are very, very good reasons why the FDA exists and the rules and regulations that support the FDA exist. I just think that we can move the bar a bit further forward because of new technology and the evolution of standards and so on. So I think we're on the same page, and I really just volunteering some potential approaches that might improve matters.
Okay, very good. This all makes perfect sense to me. So let's wrap up with next steps on how you plan to test your hypotheses and where you imagine the FDA fits into this experimentation phase. What sort of case studies might we expect to see moving forward, and realistically, when and where could they happen?
So I think the idea of many of the concepts, it's actually not new. I was running clinical trials on tablets, capturing data as source data into these tablets way back in 2001. So it's not that it cannot be done; it's just not considered the gold standard. So I think we need to continue to go to the regulators, and I pointed the finger more at the FDA. It tends to be the general point of reference for clinical research. But I'm in the process of reaching out to the EMA and other regulatory authorities, saying, right, how would you see these proposals? And I'm sure if we're looking at them, it's close to what the EMA are looking for. Some of the regulations and improvements with risk-based approaches, changes to ICH with the R3 release, they're all going in a similar direction. I think it's a case of just continue to have a dialogue, speaking to the regulators and seeing, whether it's actually a change or whether it's just a relaxation on how the existing processes are interpreted. I think that's what we need to be doing. We need to be speaking to the regulators more and pushing for these changes sooner rather than later.
Okay, very good. I love your vision with all this, Doug, and appreciate your tireless devotion to improving the throughput of clinical trials, as well as the experience of people participating in them, meaning both sites and patients, of course. Thanks for being a guest on today's show. And when you move the needle in any sense, please give me a call and we'll talk again. Sound good?
Love to.
Okay.
Thanks,
And as always, a big thank you to everyone out there for listening in. If you're not subscribed to this podcast yet, please consider going to Apple Podcasts and doing so right now so you don't miss your monthly dose of news and perspectives you'll be hard-pressed to find anywhere else. And if you're up for it, I'd also be so very grateful if you'd leave a rating and review while you're there. One final note, if you like today's show, it's only a glimpse of news and insights we have on tap for the next Scope event taking place in sunny Orlando, Florida from February 2nd through the 5th, 2026, where, spoiler alert, Doug will be moderating a panel discussion on the great data capture debate, EHR, eSource, and traditional approaches. 2 expert panels, one comprised of vendors and the other sponsors, will come together to provide a more holistic view on what truly matters from an operational and strategic perspective. Please plan to join Doug and me there, and be sure to use discount code SOT10 for a 10% discount off any current rate. For more information, visit scopesummit.com. Bye for now.